She's in the fourth. But anyway, I did like this. It's even. So now I'm thinking. We already worked that. Yeah, but you told me. I'm like, what am I taking off? I was looking on. My phone. Have both endings. I'm the president of the town. But. I'll keep trying to. This is for single violence. But I'll do that. Yes. Testing. Testing. Everybody here?
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending our water resources hall. I guess that's what we can call it. But anyways, I do appreciate you all coming out here and bear with us as we get rolling.
Good evening, folks. I want to thank you for making time out of your day on this fine spring evening to come meet with us. My name is Jeremy Cole, and I'm the city manager. This may be the first time that many of you have had the opportunity to meet with me. I'd like to introduce myself, and I have a brief statement that I'd like to make to give some context for why we're here tonight. But before I get to that, I would like to introduce the city team for joining us tonight to answer any questions and speak to this issue. So if you could just introduce your name and position.
My name is Danny Muchmore with West Tech Engineering. We're the contract city engineer for Dayton.
Tom Kepler and Public Works Supervisor.
I'm CEO and the city recorder.
Get it down the line here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Drew Hildebrand. I'm the city council president this year.
Welcome again, Annette Frank, Mayor.
I'm Chris Tyker, City Council.
I'm Robin Peterson, City Council.
Cindy Mackin, council.
And I'd like to note that Councilor Jim McGuire is not with us tonight. Incidentally, he's testifying before the state legislature about a request we have for capital funding for a water project, actually, $2 million request we've submitted for the state to bring some new wells online. We can talk about that. So he volunteered to take that task on so that I can be here with you tonight. So a little bit about me. I've been with the city since December. I've been in Oregon for a little over 4 years now, and this is a great town. Let me tell you, Dayton is a charming community. I'm absolutely thrilled to be with here and to be with y'all on this journey. So one of the first tasks, in fact, the first task that was on my plate when I started with Dayton was addressing some water issues the Public Works team brought to my attention. So the Public Works team brought to my attention some issues related to declining water production and getting very close to water production not being able to be demanded. Make a long story short, we issued a water curtailment, as you may recall, in January to buy us some time. The Public Works Department set about pinpointing what was going on. They did extensive investigation, and through a process of elimination, they identified one area where a leak could be occurring. They did some tests and further investigation and discovered that there was a leak in this location. One thing that compounded that was that it was an old line, not identified in any of our plans, that was submerged, so making it difficult to identify any leaks. Once they identified that and repaired it, we immediately started sending our water reservoirs going up. That bought us some time. The reason why we're here tonight is that bought us some time, but we're also seeing reduced production and flow rates in our wells. We'd like to update you on the steps that we're taking to address that, as well as to address concerns that we understand the community may have and that we've been hearing about water quality and similar issues. So for tonight, I'm envisioning a conversation among the city and members of the public. We're here to answer your questions, to answer any concerns that you may have. So I'd like to keep the conversation. Before I get to that, opening up for Q&A, I'd like to give you an update on some steps that we're taking to safeguard our water supply. I'll turn it over to Don. He'll give you some additional context. We can open the floor up. So we mentioned the Fisher Farms project that Councilor McGuire is at the legislature discussing tonight. This has been on our to-do list it's been in the planning for over 10 years. Funding has been an issue. Bringing new wells online has been an issue. But we are working to obtain funding to bring those 4 wells online. We've also had some discussions on an interim measure so we can supplement our water supply as we get into the drier months. You may have seen some news in the news register about a meeting we had in March with the city of Lafayette. So one of the proposals that we're looking at is temporarily using one of their transmission lines to reverse the flow of that so that we can tap into MAC water and light water, which would then go to our water treatment plant. And that would be an interim measure to ensure we have water during the dry months while we work on these longer term solutions. The third option we're looking at is upfitting some transmission lines we have for a watershed. Another source of water that we have is wells and springs like our watershed. Those transmission lines are almost a century old. So we've submitted a funding request through the congressional funding process to replace those lines. And lastly, in our water master plan, which is about 15 years old, one of the things that it talked about was a potential regional approach to addressing water among all of the cities in Yamhill County. I have participated in some informal discussions so far with some of the small towns in Yamhill County to start thinking about that again. Everything's in the very initial stages, it's very informal, but we're working with the Council of Governments on a grant request that, if funded, would generate engineering plans and other ideas on how a regional system could work. So we have 4 projects that we're working on in tandem regarding the water supply. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our Public Works Supervisor, Don, and he could talk to some of the water quality questions that we've been having.
Seeing quite a decline with our water. The wells aren't producing, they're not recovering. That's caused us to lean heavily on the watershed up at the springs, which is causing the 2 wells at that location to start to have issues with water flowing, cascading into the wells from the levels. We have been able to throttle them back with the valves, essentially taking less strain on the well, giving it a little bit less flow coming out instead of pushing it for 50 gallons a minute or 150. We've got them turned down to like 35 and 100. So we're not seeing the bubbly water that we were seeing from air getting in there from the cascading water coming into those wells. The water still is safe. It's just has air in it. We've had quite a few concerns about it. We haven't had any issues with our state testing. All of our tests have come back completely in normal range. So it is something that we are completely aware of. It is from the wells being run as hard as we had to keep up with the city's demand. But like Jeremy said, the reservoirs are coming back more to a normal operating, so we aren't running them like we had to. The well field, the 5 joint well field that we have out by the airport, those were projected for 20 years for water source. We're on year 21, so it's not completely surprising that we're seeing a decline in the production from those wells. We have turned those down as well to try and keep them operating so that they aren't shutting off when we run them where we normally run them at their set points. But it is definitely something that we are trying to monitor, trying to lower flows to keep everything operating and keep the reservoirs full. Like Jeremy said, we are going every avenue that we possibly can to try and figure out how to keep water flowing, good quality water flowing. We are leaning on our neighbors and trying to make things work out. We're looking at what it's going to take to put Fisher Farms online, if that is an option financially. We are having conversations on cost analysis for that project, for water quality, for continuing to try and utilize the water that we have, the well fields that we have. But by no means are we out of danger here. We are more than likely going into summer. We're probably going to see water declining through the well field, through the springs. It happens every year. The springs, things get dry, water goes away. So we are more than likely looking at another curtailment coming if something doesn't change water-wise. But we are trying. We're doing what we can. So
Don, I wonder if you could tell them a little bit about the company that does our testing for water. Just because I don't want anybody to get the impression that we're just, doing it in the back room or anything, so maybe you can get that.
So we are required bi-weekly to do water samples. We take them to a state accredited lab over in Wilsonville. They have nothing to do with the city in any way, shape or form, other than we drop off samples, they run the test, send us results. We submit our results and they submit their results directly to the state. So it's not anything that we're doing in-house. It's not anything other than us going out and physically filling the sample bottle and then filling out paperwork and dropping it off at the lab.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Yeah. Question.
Dave, you explained about that reverse flow from Lafayette to Dayton, and it takes water from McMinnville. Is that water station they have next to the Lafayette Oakville Highway there?
It is, I'll let our city engineer speak to this.
Yeah, several years ago, Lafayette built a pump station. Water Light extended a water line from Airport Road out to where that pump station is. And then, so Lafayette could hook up to it. Lafayette paid for a portion of that line, pro rata share of it based on the usage. And they pump water, they go through their pump station, it pumps through a transmission line that runs along the Lafayette highway over to Lafayette. Right now, the static pressure in the McMinnville system along the highway there is somewhere around 65 to 70 PSI, somewhere in that range. The static pressure in Lafayette system, since their reservoir is clear up on the hill, is about 95 PSI there. So they have to have a pump station in order to move water from the lower pressure zone in Backwater and Lights transmission line into their system. So it pumps along there. There's a second line that was built 21 years ago now, in 2004. It runs from the Dayton water treatment plant along Flower Lane, along Ash Road, across the highway, and then ties into that transmission line that I was just speaking about. So when they're using water from the joint well field that's coming through the Dayton water treatment plant, they have pumps inside the treatment plant building that pump water from that plant through that transmission line and then over the lot. So what we're proposing to do is when their pump station is running, we'll run water backwards through that line, modify some piping inside of the treatment plant building. So we take it out of one pipeline, run it over and discharge it into the inlet line that goes to the reservoir. So that we can take backwater and light water, feed it through that line and use it to fill the Dayton reservoir. And we've had discussions with Lafayette and Backwater and Light about that concept. And if it goes forward, then Dayton would pay for their portion of the water that's coming through Lafayette. And also for their percentage, or their portion of the cost for running that pump station while during the times when we're taking water. The intent is that during the periods when Lafayette's pump station has capacity in excess of what they need, that excess capacity can easily come over to fill the fields. This is an idea we came up with as an interim measure. Eventually, we've also had discussions with Backwater and Light about having a permanent intertie from their transmission line back into Dayton. Now, Dayton's system pressure is lower than Backwater and Light system pressure. So Dayton would not need to build a pump station in order to get water out of Backwater and Light system into our system. It would flow by the pressure that's already in their system. But in the interim, there's an existing pipeline that's out there that's not being used right now because the well fields aren't producing enough water for Lafayette to take water from the treatment plant, the Dayton treatment plant. So we're looking at utilizing that line for the interim to run water the other direction. That's in it, you know, essentially siphon off the excess capacity to fill Dayton's reservoir during periods when Dayton's wells and the watershed area are not adequate to keep it full.
How's Lafayette's water supply? They're decent too, or? Gonna be afford to give away or let it?
Well, they're not really giving away anything. They have authorization from that water. They're buying water from that water line already. They have been for several years. They also have the watershed area up in the hills that has several wells and some springs that during the winter time produces. I don't think it's all of the water that they need, but it produces a larger percentage of the water that they need. During the summertime, when those flows decline because everything dries up, they're short of water. And so that during the summertime, you take a lot more water from that water line. But when you build one of these pump stations, you build it for the capacity that you think you're gonna need 20 years from now, not necessarily what you need right now. So right now, the pump station turns on, it runs for whatever length of time, a few hours, until the reservoir is completely filled up. And then when the pressure transducer of the reservoir says the reservoir's full, it sends a signal down to the pump station and says shut off. So what we're proposing to do is, you know, let's say, and I don't know what the numbers are, but let's just say that they're running, in the summer, they're running the pumps, you know, 10 hours a day. It may be more, maybe less than that. But what we're proposing is that we just take a portion of that water off to fill the Dayton reservoir, and the pumps might run for 14 or 16 hours during the day. Dayton would pay for that, the water that they're diverting over to our reservoir, and also pay for our portion of the operational costs for running those pumps for a long period of time.
Danny Holbrook, and two questions and a comment. I'll start with a comment. I request if there is any water curtailment consideration, if you could let us know sooner rather than later, because a lot of us are starting to think about gardening, and that could change what we do this summer. So that's the request. The second thing is, could you speak to the water table generally in the area? Do you have any knowledge? Is it steady? Is it declining? Because I think that may speak to the larger picture of what's happening in the valley. And then I just kind of picking up on what Don shared as far as, you know, 20-year well, you know, life. Is that something that we would see for Fisher Farms as well, or would things be designed a little differently if we had funding to do or move forward with that? Okay.
I'll try to answer the questions in the order there. If I forget, I'll re-ask the second, what the other questions were. What was the first question?
First question, water table.
Water table, okay, great. There's two aquifers that the city is pulling out of. Down in the valley floor, we have these thick layers of alluvial like clay. And then there's bands varying thicknesses of like gravel lenses that were laid down as the old river channels shifted back and forth. And looks like I can't talk without my hands moving. And then once you get over to the hillsides, the wells are drilled down into basalt. So there's kind of two different answers to your question. Overall, water tables are tending to decline. Up in the basalt aquifers, they have declined over the past several decades by quite a bit. I mean, right now, and it's probably been 10 or 15 years ago, the city of Lafayette had one spring that they had up in their watershed area. And it's just kind of an explanation to illustrate the answer. They had one spring up there that's called Bluebird Spring that produced, in the wintertime, produced way far in excess of what the city needed at that time. And so the water that was coming out of that spring would just overflow into the creek and be lost. And so at the time, actually, our Westec helped them design and implement what's called an aquifer storage and recovery system. What they took during the winter time, they would take all that excess spring water and inject it down into one of the wells, the basalt wells up in their watershed. Because over the life of that well, the water table had declined. Oh, I think it was probably 50 or 60 feet. And so during the winter time, we would essentially try to fill that back up with water that otherwise would just go down the creek and be lost for use. So the same the Dayton wells over on the edge of the hills are in that same basalt formation. And over time, the water table has tended to decline. Dayton is in a little different situation because the springs that you have are not, will never have been large enough to greatly exceed what Dayton's capacity and needs have been in the wintertime. So aquifer storage and recovery system for Dayton doesn't really make sense because we don't have excess water to try to put back into the ground. Now, when we get out into the valley floor, we have these gravel band aquifers out here that is also further exacerbated by the fact that all of the water that's out here in this Dayton Prairie area has high levels of iron and manganese, which is why the Dayton water treatment plant was built back in 2004. It's a green sand filter that removes iron and manganese from the well water before it gets pumped into the system. I don't know if anybody here lived here in Dayton prior to 2004. We weren't the city engineer at the time, but I've heard lots of stories about there were times where that water was not the most aesthetically pleasing. But it's stained, sinks and fixtures and, it had lots of minerals in it. And, and it also, once you get up where the city's wells are, both Fisher Farms and out by the airport, the groundwater actually has methane in it. It's conjectured that it's from old trees and stuff that got buried by floods millennia ago, thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago, and it's decomposing underground. But the wells out at the airport, we pump it out of the ground and run it through a methane stripper that blows air through it and strips the methane out of it. And then we have a booster pump in each of the wells that pumps the water into town through a transmission line to the treatment plant and goes through the filters to remove the iron and manganese. And then it goes into the Dayton reservoir, and then it gets pumped into the distribution system from the reservoir. Now, that long-winded explanation lead-up is to explain the challenge with the water table and the water availability in the valley floor. On a lot of those aquifers out here, the water level isn't necessarily declining. But because you have the iron and manganese and the methane in there that serves as essentially a food source for some of the bacteria down there that also utilize I think it's oxidize.
Either way.
It basically they take the iron and the food source and they grow from that, and it's the common term is iron bacteria, but that grows on they're not dangerous to human health or anything, but it results in biofilm growing on the screens of of the well casing. And the screens are just like a slotted, it's got, yeah, in a very, the slots are very, fairly small to keep the sand and stuff from coming through. But as the bacteria grow on there, you get this biofilm that grows on there, and it closes those openings down a little bit. And in addition to that, the iron bacteria, when they feed and utilize the iron and minerals in the water, they pull them out of solution, and it basically makes nodules or incrustations and stuff. So while you can go down in the wells and they can scrub the screens or use air or chlorine or something to try to kill or to knock back the biofilm, once those minerals are deposited on there, I mean, I'm sure everybody has had the experience that when, in a sink or something where you get really thick deposits of minerals on there, it's really hard to remove those once they're there. And so the combination of all of that is that the amount of water you can get through those well screens tends to go down over time. And also, while we can clean the well screen itself, we can't clean the gravel pack around the well screen or the gravel back into the aquifer where those same bacteria are growing and proliferating and kind of filling in all those little void spaces back there. So the tendency is that over time, the well production will go down. The most water you're ever going to get out of a well is, the day after it was drilled and when they're doing the testing. What the unknown is how fast it's going to decline. But there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The production out of any well that's drilled, it will decline over time. In some wells, it declines just a little bit. Other wells, it declines a lot. The further complicating factor is out of the wells out by the well field, there's a big, thick gravel aquifer. It's got a clay cap on top of it, then many feet or tens of feet thick of a gravel aquifer that all of the farmers pull out of and have very senior water rights on it. When the city went to drill the wells out there was some litigation, and the Water Research Department of the state of Oregon told the city, you can't draw out of that aquifer because all the farmers have senior rights on it. So the city had to case through that aquifer, and then the screens are down in the lower aquifers that are relatively narrow gravel bands down there that don't have as much water flow through them. And furthermore, over time, it's not as clean of a conduit from wherever the water's coming from. So now that was a really, really long answer to your question, but I hope it kind of gives you some background on it, because it's not a real simple yes, what, I mean, if all I did is say yes, water levels are declining, you wouldn't have a sense of why.
Thank you.
Okay, and now I completely forgot, what was your second question?
The second one was as far, you kind of addressed it, but as far as if we had new wells at Fisher Farms, are we facing the same exact scenario?
Yeah, yes, undoubtedly. I mean, nobody can definitively predict how fast those wells will decline, but it's the same type of gravel aquifer that we're pulling out. And it's the same water chemistry is very, very similar. It's not identical, but it's very, very similar. And they're going to be screen wells. It's going to go decline over time. So
in other words, there's not any kind of other updated technology that would maybe help to mitigate those factors.
there is technologies that would mitigate it. There's not any technologies that would solve it.
Right.
And for a number of years, there is for that 8 or 9, 6 or 8 years that the city was using that Suez water solutions. Just a number of years. Anyways, was it 8? Okay, I'm glad somebody remembers time frames. But, and this is quite a number of years ago. We hooked the city up with an outfit that their business model is that they sign a contract with cities or well users, and they would come out on a regular basis, and they had some proprietary equipment that they had come up with that they would put down in the well, and they would inject liquid CO2 down into the well casing and essentially freeze the water down there, not just inside the casing, but back out into the surrounding gravel and stuff. When they freeze it there, that tends to kill the bacteria. But and that worked, actually, that worked very well for a while, and the way the contract was written is the city signed, I think it was a 15-year contract they signed with them. And they spent all their money up front to come out, pull all the well pumps, install all of their equipment and piping down into the well casing. So that after that, all they had to do is come up with their specialized tanker truck, hook up a couple of hoses, inject it in there, and they'd spend, a pretty small amount of time at each well. And then once it thawed out, you'd pump it to waste until the water was clear, and then it'd be back online. That seemed to work really well for quite a number of years. Unfortunately, that company was acquired by some bigger company who looked at all these business divisions that in this company they bought and said, oh, well, this one's profitable, this one's not. And so they closed down their well maintenance division. But and nobody else out here in the Pacific Northwest has access to that type of well maintenance technology. Now, whether it was patented or what, I have no idea. But we've checked around up and down the coast, and nobody has it. Nobody does that type of thing. Because I guess it's pretty intensive. And this crew that did this well rehab, they didn't just do it in the Pacific Northwest. They did it all across the Great Plains. They had a number of crews in these trucks that would just do this big circuit. And, day after day, they'd just be doing wells here. Next down the road, they do wells in the next town. But that's not available anymore. And what we have noticed is since that they've left that market, and we've had to go back to the traditional, scrubbing, trying to use brushes and stuff to scrub the well screens and just chlorination and stuff like that. It's been far less effective. So, yes, there are things out there that could be done. They're not available to it. Nobody in this part of the country does it.
So if you have money and want to start a business, yeah.
Did that answer the question?
Yes, you have. Thank you.
Okay.
That Matt pumping station, did they get water from the river here, the Yamhill River?
No. Question was, where does Backwater and Light water come from, correct? Backwater and Light has 2 impoundment reservoirs up in the hills, in the Coast Range. And so they pull water from those 2 reservoirs. It runs through their treatment plant that's up kind of north of Benville, up in the hills there, and then that comes down into town. There is a discussion, and Backwater and Light, and Dayton also, but it's other local jurisdictions have acquired water rights on the Willamette River with the idea that in the future, Backwater and Light is planning to build a second water treatment plant that pulls water from the Willamette, treats it, and then puts it in a system. But that's probably a number of decades out in the future. I mean, when we've talked to them, did they say 20+ years, they're thinking?
Yeah.
Okay, so, but they're acquiring water rights now, and they're purchasing your water rights from other people who are getting rid of them. The water rights by their nature are first in time is first in line, and so when you get a water right, there's several parts to it. One, it gives you the right to appropriate water, a certain amount of water at a certain flow rate from a certain location for a defined use. And those water rights are a property right. And so they're valuable. And the first water right that was issued, they get to use their full water, the full amount of water, and then they keep going. And when there's more water being pulled out of from the source than is available, the more junior water rights get cut off by the Water Resource Department in the county water master.
And
So-
to complicate it, they're over allocated those rights.
I mean, it doesn't matter if it's groundwater or Willamette River or Yamhill River or any creek. There is more water rights that have been issued by this state of Oregon than there is water in that stream or in that source during the critical times of the year. So.
Well, out of curiosity, I wonder how the audience feels in terms of a regional water facility. Do we have a feeling, a good feeling, a bad feeling? I don't know, I need more information about it.
Can you explain exactly what that means? That was one of my questions. What is the regional approach? What does that mean?
That means all the cities get together to have one main facility that would, I think they can hear me, but, that would, you would acquire those water rights, and there would be a board created, and all kinds of plans made to determine who does what and where and all that. But we all get to pull essentially from this main water area.
So silly question on that. Why hasn't that happened already? That sounds like a more cost-effective way to provide for everybody.
Well, that is a good question. Actually, it was talked about many years ago, but they couldn't acquire the water rights that they needed. In addition, there were some inner workings in terms of what was the city gonna be able to, a specific city within this regional water facility, what sort of rights and ability would they have? And that kind of caused a little bit of a rift on top of the huge price tag that just pretty much put all the small cities out. And I will say that the discussion is kind of been rebirthed. And Drew and I went today to a meeting with all the mayors in Yamhill County, or the ones that could attend, and Kit Johnston, and had that very discussion about where this will go and kind of a time frame to start really digging in and talking. And it was determined, I think, June, July of this coming summer for us to, some of the main players to get together and get our representatives, Elmer, to also be in on the conversation. So, I mean, there's lots of things that can happen in that regard, and it's a great idea, but one, it's gonna be several 5 to 10 years out in order to acquire the water rights, in order to lay out the intergovernmental agreements between and who's gonna be the board and all those things, in addition to funding. So that's a long-term goal that definitely needs to be looked at and discussed. But I think probably our easiest and quickest, least expensive would be the intertie with Lafayette. And that's, hopefully we can get that on board right away while we're working to do the other things, but, there's always something. And it doesn't help with all the red tape, so. Yes, I'm done.
Just to follow up on that. I mean, there's a number of reasons why the regional option has not progressed faster. But part of it has to do with the fact that some of the assumptions that were made many decades ago were a little bit more optimistic than turned out to be warranted. For instance, when the wells were drilled out there, they did some preliminary testing, and the state of Oregon issued water rights to the cities for, it was 1,500 gallons a minute, which right now, I think those wells are producing 350, maybe 300 to 350 gallons a minute. The most they've ever produced altogether was somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 gallons a minute. And as I alluded to at the start, when they first drill a well, they do some test pumping on it and see how much water they can get out of the ground right then. And then they use, the hydrogeologists do some calculations and say how fast does the well recover, and then it's got assumptions built into it. They predict how much water they think that well will produce over the longer term. Well, some of those assumptions turned out to not be, to be more optimistic than was warranted. If the city had 1,500 gallons a minute of water available out in those well fields, we wouldn't be having this discussion. We'd have water for the next 40 years. But one of the challenges is also that the question that tends to get asked is, how do we get a long-term sustainable water supply for the city of Dayton? That depends on what your definition of long-term is. If you're looking at long-term as 20 or 30 years, you get an entirely different answer than if your definition of long-term is 80 or 100 or more years than that. Because as the city keeps growing and your well production goes down, there's going to come a point where those two lines cross. How far out in the future are you looking? And what are your assumptions on what your water supply is going to do between now and then? And so some of it had to do with cost, some of it had to do with the assumptions on what they was assuming the water availability was going to be into the future. There's a whole myriad of reasons why. But what we've been trying to encourage everybody to look at is, when we say long term, let's think, how long is Dayton going to be here? I mean, it's been here for 150 plus years now. I think it's going to be here for well longer than that into the future. So thinking in 20 or 30 or 40, even 40 years into the future is a little bit, can end up being short-sighted.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, kind of a follow-up to that. So you mentioned how we have the aquifers and all the different issues that we're having with bacteria and such. Are all the outlying towns, municipalities having the same problem?
Yes.
And is McMinnville kind of holding all the cards? I mean, kind of dictating what they do about that? I mean, to help everybody? Because it sounds like that's our only option is to go to McMinnville and help everybody.
And they're willing to help, but there's a price.
Well, whatever gets
How did they manage to build such a great water system and everyone else has?
Oh, well, yeah, she wants to know how McMinnville got their water treatment facility and then their water.
So the future plan that.
well, there's a number of answers to that. Part of it has to do with they're a lot bigger and they have a lot more resources. But they've also been planning this stuff, for well over 100 years. I mean, some of their impoundments and stuff and their watershed, they own very large tracts around the reservoirs up in the hills that were purchased a long, long time ago. And, you know, to build a surface water treatment plant to treat water from the Lima River is going to be a very expensive proposition. The more people you can spread that across, the less it's going to be per person. There's really no way that Dayton can afford to build a water treatment plant off of the treating Willamette River water just for the city of Dayton. It would, the cost for that water would put it out of reach of all residents.
In the meeting we went to today, was it 1893 that Kim said they took control of the springs, and
I can't remember the exact year,
I
but
wanted to say it was 1800 and something.
It was in late 1800s that they first started acquiring watersheds and laying the groundwork for their impoundments, their, you know, the reservoirs that they built up there in the Coast Range.
Yeah, like 1800s.
yeah,
No, it's long enough ago that the original water pipes that came down from those impoundments were wood stake pipe. But Dayton has been forward-looking as well. Your watershed area was acquired by the city of Dayton in 1904. And that's when the first water system was put in for the city of Dayton. And that is also wood stake pipe. We have some of the old that we dug up and some clays up in the watershed, and so markedly well preserved of some wood stake pipe that was put in back in 1904. Which it smells sort of like creosote, but it's really damn, so I don't want to drink water.
Speaking of drinking water, you mentioned that the water gets tested on a regular basis from that place in Wilsonville. Do you guys post that for us to see anywhere? Or can you?
Yeah, that's a lot of good.
It's a part of the consumer confidence report that we send out. It's an annual report. It gets posted online. But right results for those tests. Believe me, you would know if we failed one because
Oh, I'm sure.
you get to be front page news when that happens.
Papers in there. And also. Really nice on like an app or online.
Jeremy, is that something we could do, maybe a monthly water?
Mayor, I'd like to know, if you do a Google search for OHA drinking water system lookup on the Oregon Health Administration website, you can look up all of the water systems in Oregon, and you can look up City of Dayton, and that shows all of the lab tests that we turn into the Oregon Health Administration.
Can you put that link on the website?
Sure. Sure, absolutely.
Yes. Thank you for
No.
Thank you for in my heart.
What was that?
stable before it in the water.
No.
I know that there's times that, the chlorine smell is so strong that you can't even stand a standard kitchen sink.
We monitor. We monitor it, it's part of our daily rounds when we go to the treatment plant. We're required to take chlorine readings. We've got a machine that's down there that takes readings around the clock, 24 hours a day. We have to stay within a certain parameter and we can't exceed that on either direction, too high or too low. Otherwise we are non-compliant. And we get alarms for that, so we are aware if it drops below that. We actually. had.
Major question. Cause I own land out on Ash Road. And the city spent quite a bit of money in annexing that into the urban growth boundary. And I had that property sold. But, because, the city, now we're having a water problem, but before, it was, sewer and water. Getting to be able to have city water and sewer out there. And who is gonna pay for what? And, so my question is, of course, I had to buy her back out because the city was sort of dragging their feet. And I lost a lot of money because of that sale. And so, you know, I've been told by probably 4 different people in the city of Dayton, city employees and city council and all, naming names, but, I keep getting a different date on, the first city manager told me 2 to 4 years. This city manager said 3 and 3 probably, and then the city, employee said 20. So it's not gonna make any sense. And I went to several meetings and, the county commissioners meeting, I'm looking at rezoning my property so that I don't have to worry about the city of Dayton. And so, because now we're talking that there's 145 homes that can go out on our property. And, you're talking about a water problem. And then Neck Roads, looking at quite a few more than that, because they're little cottages. And, one developer's told one thing and one developer's told another. So I'm a little bit concerned that, when we put in an application and the amount of money that's paid for, they're literally shut down. And so, what good does it do me to try to sell my farm? And, the city of Dayton is gonna shoot the developer down. That's what I wanna know, because why didn't we do land swap when the city wasn't ready yet? I was told they were.
Despite the swap happening, your property's at the end of the line.
No, I already went over all that, so I'm not, when the city put their little line out there for the water to Lafayette, that had to be, an easement. So the easement, and I was told, and I went to the Yandell, you weren't there, I went to the Yandell County Commissioner. And they said that that's what the city of Dayton told them, that not all the people there had to annex in.
No, all the people out there would have to annex in down there on Ash Road. No, it's county property out there. They're not even on our water system. So unless the people that.
Yes, you know what we're talking about? Because I asked for recordings on, the initial meetings that were going on in the city of Dayton, and supposedly they weren't recorded, well, figured out now. But I'm just tired that, we were told that, because I asked about the, annexation all the way down. And, I was told that, not everybody on that road made it to annex in. that they could, put in a water district and, the people that wanted to annex in, once the city put their water out there, then, we would pay for the initial cost of it. And once the water was put out there and other people wanted to annex in, then, they would have to pay for that portion of the line. But I was out there and my folks owned the farm, when they put the line out there in, 2004. And I kept being told, no, there was no line, there's no line, but now there's a line.
I'm sure, I hear what you're saying. I'd like to provide some, just try to address your comment the best I can. So folks out in the urban growth boundary, you're stakeholders in this process. We absolutely understand that. And the fact is, there are a lot of infrastructure needs to service urban growth boundary. We'll tap into that, start developing it. And under Oregon's land use process, urban growth boundaries, the intention behind that is to project our growth over a 20-year period. Now, obviously, we as a city, as a state, as a country, we have some very pressing needs. We're in the midst of a housing crisis, and we would absolutely love to do our part to chip away at that. But we have some significant infrastructure needs. Addressing our water needs right now for our current customers is top of our priority right now. So that's got to be our main focus. But we absolutely hear what you're saying, and I wish I had a better answer for you. But over the next year, we've got to get this water situation for our current customers figured out before we even start thinking broader. Any other questions?
Miss,
This is a question about the chlorine smell. I live on Ferry Street, just this side of Flower Lane, and every once in a while, I get a strong smell of chlorine. Do you add new chlorine to the water every once in a while?
So it's on an automatic dose. So we have set points that we're. Anywhere between 2 and 14 minutes on system, so it takes a reading, and as long as everything's good, there's no need to dose up or down. But that's all part of the automated system that's down there that we just upgraded in last January.
okay, thanks.
I do have another question. When the city's filling out their budget, do they include, upgrades to water systems and stuff? Do they allot certain amount of money that goes to fund these projects? Or they all grant driven?
It's a mix. Some of it is pay as you go. I'm working on the budget right now. I have a lot of infrastructure related projects that I'm trying to plug in there to use our current resources. Some of it is financed with our utility bridge project and our pump station project. Those were all financed. So there is some loan components to that, but also grants. We've been very aggressive in seeking grant funding. So it's a mixture of pay-as-you-go, loan financing, grants.
Jeremy, I had one question. The well that's located on the Lorette property, which is it belongs to Lorette, so who you're talking about when you said it's next to Linda's property. There's irrigation wells, and I was told that they bought that property basically for those wells. True or false, I don't know, but if they come from those irrigation wells, those were agricultural. Do you have a gallonage that is required when you have irrigation well?
To answer the question, if I misunderstood anything, just redirect me, okay? The city acquired it's the old Fisher Farms property out there. They bought the property because water rights are attached to a property. So they bought the property in order to acquire the water rights that had a more senior date on those water rights than the city would be able to acquire if they tried to drill a new well.
Well,
So
But
those water rights are for a specific amount of water.
my question
He's
is,
talking about the zoning, I believe.
Okay. And the city did go through and do a transfer so that they switched the use from agricultural use to
this is what uh,
I can give you a generalized answer, but that's about all I can do at this point. When, when the city, if there's multiple straws down into the same, let's call it bathtub, and you're pulling water out of that, it's gonna draw the water table in the whole area will go down. So yes, if the city does start pulling water out of those aquifers, the amount of water is going to decline that's available out there. The water rights that are out there, as I pointed out before, the most senior water rights have the right to use their allocated water preferentially over more junior rights. I have no idea what the water right on your well is in relation to what the ones that the city had acquired, but hasn't developed yet, so.
were you aware of that? That's why they're always water running through there, coming out of the fusion. Maybe you should buy that property and you have to pump them.
Had a comment.
So we've covered a lot of different things tonight, and I wanted to, because I like to look at things in very digestible ways, just for me personally. And so I wanted to kind of bring us to the middle a little bit, kind of clarify a little bit what we talked about. We're looking at essentially a four-pronged approach, right? So the short term and near term, the ASAP solution is the tie with Lafayette, right? So we're looking at a year or less for that as the goal, from what I understand it to be. And then the two prong on that is the Fisher Farms access through the funding that Councilor McGuire is lobbying for at this point in time. Literally at this point in time. The third prong of that approach is the replacement of the transmission lines up to the watershed and then the springs. And then the fourth piece of this is the very, very long-term, but in the century, kind of viewpoint on that of the regional water solution. So, we're looking very, very short term at, okay, how do we solve this problem immediately or as soon as possible and get us kind of a stopgap solution to get us to 2.2, 2.3, then long-term 2.4. So, as we kind of talk about all these different things, it's important to understand, we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. There's a diversification of solutions. So we're looking at a lot of different ways to get this done, and, you know, to get it done as soon as we can in all different ways. So just wanted to kind of put a little, you know, bring that in a little bit.
Put a little bow on it.
Little bow on it. Cool. That's all I have. Yeah. What other questions can we answer for you all tonight? Well, we sure do appreciate y'all coming out, and we wanna stick behind, if you wanna have some conversations with either the city team or myself or members of the council. Help fill some things. So stay tuned online, stay tuned for our budget process, which is coming up. This is gonna be an ongoing conversation. Madam Mayor, do you have anything you'd like to add, please?
Do we need anybody on, I don't think we need anybody on, budget anymore, do we? We got a full,
We do have some vacancies. Tell us about that.
We do have some vacancies for the budget committee, if anybody's interested. There is an application online. If you can't find it, you can just call us or email me, rvargas@daytonoregon.gov. And I'll forward you the application so that we can get a full budget committee.
thank you, we'd love to have you come out, and we appreciate you coming out tonight.
Thank you.